Michael Jordan is not only the best basketball player, but he's the most exciting basketball player to ever play.
Tatum fires away, pumps it in, 51 for Jayson Tatum.
The Big Three NBA podcast is powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Hello, folks. Welcome to another edition of the Big Three NBA podcast. I am Sherrod Blakely, joined by the one and the only Bobby Manning. What's going on, Bobby? How you doing?
Nothing much. Good time of year. Interesting one for the Celtics here. Run into probably their first bit of extended adversity this year. Tough losses. Not panic time. We don't have the panic meter over here, Sherrod, but I'm keeping it on the lower side.
Well, that's good, Bobby, because some of us who are real quick to hit that panic button, and the minute the Celtics do anything other than just blow teams out by 30 points. But to Bobby's point, the Celtics, they've lost 2 of the last 3 games against 2 teams that, if we're being honest and real, these are not the type of teams that you'd expect the Celtics to have much trouble with, let alone lose to, particularly when you look at this Orlando team, which is frankly just been decimated by injuries. And the Celtics lost 108-104 to them. They don't have Pinchero. They don't have the Wagner brothers. And we're not even going to get into Gary Harris. They didn't have him either. And the only key player the Celtics were missing was Jayson Tatum. So, Bobby, from your perspective, what the hell happened in that game?
The Magic play them tough. They always do. Now, I didn't think it would be possible with all the people that they were missing, and they still have a ton of size. Goga Bitadze, who was ejected later in the game, was coming off an amazing game himself. And you got Jonathan Isaac, and there's a lot of athleticism, a lot of speed there. And I think as this season progresses, Sherrod, we've talked about it a couple of times now, the teams that can hit them with speed, space them out a little bit, which the Magic didn't do, but they were able to play a unique defensive brand that I think threw the Celtics off. And it was obviously by far the fewest threes that the Celtics were able to get off this year. I think only 33. And another brutal shooting night, which is similar to what hurt them in that Chicago game at home a week before. So I wasn't totally stunned with what the Magic were able to do. And Jamal Mosley, I mean, if he can keep this going, he might have to win Coach of the Year the way they've just been decimated and sustained in the standings. I think they're 19-12 now. So it's absurd what they were able to do in this game. But from the Celtics perspective, they looked thrown off by not being able to generate threes. A ton of turnovers inside the basket. They were pretty wild and frenetic. And I'll give them some break over the Jayson Tatum situation because a guy goes down that important minutes before the game. It is tough to adjust on the fly. And their rotations were a bit of a mess in this game too. But it wasn't their best night. And they're stacking up a handful of games here that weren't their best look between Chicago and this game, and even the second Chicago game. That wasn't going in a great direction before Jayson Tatum erupted late in the third quarter there. So I guess it's a good moment for Tatum's MVP candidacy, how much they're relying on him right now. But for the rest of the team, Sherrod, I read about this last night. They aren't the same three-point shooting team that we saw a year ago right now. They fell to 16th last night in terms of percentage after finishing second a year ago. And I think those 2 losses there highlight that, and we'll see which direction it turns in here. But they're shooting more threes and not shooting as well on them.
Yeah. And some of the key contributors to that 3-point shooting, blitz that they've been able to hit teams with, guys like Sam Hauser, for example, isn't physically speaking where he was a year ago this time. And teams are defending him, I think, a little bit differently, even when he is healthy. But you touched on, to me, there were 2 numbers that really jumped out statistically in that Orlando loss. It was the first one you pointed out was the 3-point attempts. They only took, I think, 32, 33, and they were like 8, only made 8. And the other number, which I thought was interesting, was free throw attempts. Even though the Celtics went to the line more, Orlando took 21 free throws and made every single one of them. It just feels, Bobby, and you, I'm curious what your thoughts are. It seems that when the Celtics have lost to teams, those teams have been damn near perfect in some way, shape, or form, whether it's forcing turnovers, whether it's knocking down free throws. It just seems that beating the Celtics almost takes the almost perfect storm for teams as opposed to teams just playing pretty good and finding a way to win.
Yeah, and that's a credit to the Celtics' flexibility. I do think if you take the three away from them, they're still able to win. They're 9-4 when they shoot below the league average from three this year, which is still pretty good. And they were great in that situation last year, too, after not succeeding in 2023. So they found different ways to succeed. This Porzingis component, I think, as it evolves here, is going to be critical to the season. And last year, they were able to get by without him. I think this year, between his paint touches, which have been as efficient as they were a year ago, and his defensive growth, I think he's doing a good job on that end. And their defense, actually, statistically, to start this year, has been better than it was overall last year. And I think a big part of that has been Porzingis' impact since his return. So they can find other ways to win. That's what disappointed me most about this Magic game, is that you couldn't just strangle their offense, because they have a bad offense over there, especially without all the pieces that we're talking about here, and pull out a win here. And they almost did. I like the Horford shot at the end. I like the way that they pushed back in the game. Jaylen was rattling off floater after floater late in this one, and carried a heavy load offensively successfully for them without the three either. So they have different dynamics, different things that they can go to. I don't think it was the greatest coaching night in terms of being able to go to different stuff, different lineups. Sam Hauser wasn't able to get a three off in this game. You had different lineups, double big wise, that weren't able to take advantage of the Magic here. So could you have gone to a Drew Peterson, who wasn't even active in this game? I guess that had something to do with the Tatum situation. Could you have gone to a Shireman, who was called up for that game? We've seen them try these different guys off the bench that they're starting to phase out a little bit right now. And I don't think that's a great idea if you're Missoula. We've talked about Sherrod. You don't have to be perfect this regular season. You can try things. You can invest in a guy, try to build up his minutes, build up his role. And given the Hauser situation that you mentioned, Sherrod, I think it's all the more important that they do that, because this back thing isn't going away with him. And maybe over the All-Star break, you get it right, or as time goes on, he's able to manage it and not miss games. But he's already missed 7 games, I believe, after missing only 3 a year ago. So that's a bigger concern, I think, than people are making it out to be, because he was so important all the way through the finals last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And he whether people give him the credit for it or not, his ability to knock down threes at such a ridiculously high clip, it opens the floor for so many other guys, because that you can't just simply let him just walk down and just catch and shoot. That's what he wants to do. And teams have, I thought the latter part of last season and the early part of this year, they're doing a much better job of closing out on him, which he has then countered with that, 2-3 dribble, step and pull mid-range shot, which he can hit. The Celtics, they really seem to be, to your point, Bobby, I think starting to basically get more and more into this is our playoff rotation mode. And it just feels like they're pushing that button a little too soon. Just curious your thoughts on that.
I think it's a trust thing. And to go back to the threes, you don't have many guys off this bench that teams will respect as shooters right now. Right. And Peterson's the guy I'm pointing to that I do think they need to build up, and in 2 spot situations earlier this month or even late last month, he came through in that Cleveland game, the best example of that. So I'm surprised that they haven't kept him around, tried to get him minutes, get him more involved, because he is the one among these pieces off the bench here, these players, that can actually space the floor, handle a little bit, do some things from a versatile standpoint offensively. Now, maybe they have concerns about the defense that they want to continue to develop in Maine. I get that, but there are going to be many nights here where Hauser's not good to go, and he's the perfect guy to slide into that spot. Now, I understand the Tillman situation. They gave him that spot start, I believe, against Detroit, and he missed 3 threes in a hurry, and the Pistons weren't even guarding him. So his 3-point shot and his offensive role, I think, have reached a point where Missoula doesn't have that trust in him, especially at the 4. But I wouldn't phase out him either due to his defensive versatility. I think that's another guy that you have to keep involved to some degree here. Now, Jordan Walsh, does he have to end up going back to Maine here, given the way teams haven't had to guard him? That might be where that goes. And all the way down the line, I don't think Jane Springer, despite the spot minutes they gave him a couple games ago here, is going to be much of a factor. So the bench is thinned out a bit, and you see Sherrod when when things get tough, when they need to tighten that rotation, when they're missing a wing here, they've mostly just gone double big and played Luke Cornett and Porzingis together, Cornett and Horford and Porzingis, and that's the way they've filled out those wing minutes here. And in a game like this where they needed some more shooting, some more offense, that probably wasn't the best way to go.
Yeah, and again, not to keep, kind of hammering home the Hauser situation, but when he's not able to be impactful and out there, it puts a little bit more pressure, a little bit more onus on Peyton Pritchard to make some things happen. And we're starting to see it feels as though teams with a above average level of athleticism in that backcourt and at those wing positions, that's the almost like the secret sauce to minimize or limit Peyton's impact. It just seems like he was never able to get any kind of rhythm, in large part because of what Orlando was able to do from a defensive athleticism standpoint.
Yeah, and he got off to such an absurd start to this year. I mean, 43% on threes, 41% on dribble jumpers, open catch and shoot threes. He was 60% to start this year, and 70% at the rim too, which I think is the big one here. Can he keep that up? Because he was having so much success inside the arc too that I think it put defenses at a bind. And actually, I talked to him in Washington about that, and he said that improvement from the mid-range, that improvement around the basket, he feels has kept defenders off balance a little bit. So you're not able to just shut off the three with him typically. And against a team like this where there is size inside and guys that can take away the lane. I mean, what the Magic did in this game was super impressive in terms of they were running the Celtics off the line with multiple players and then recovering inside with help to be able to stop them at the basket too. And they're athletic enough to do that. Great recoveries throughout this game, guys with size that can cover a lot of range. So I do think that's something that can impact Pritchard. Now against Chicago, where he wasn't at his best either, I don't think that's as much as the case here. So we're going to have to see whether he's just going to come down to earth a little bit, because it's been absurd. I mean, I think through 25 games or whatever they've reached at this point, it's probably all around one of the more efficient starts to a season that we've seen from a player. And we're talking like Curry, Jokic, guys like that. So it's going to come down a little bit. How much does it come down? I think that's going to be a big factor for the Celtics offense going forward this season, because while he has started sky high, you have guys like Holiday, who's stuck around 32% from three. Jaylen Brown with the 1 of 7 in this game is stuck down there with a career low. And Hauser, of course, too, has worked his way back up to 37, but that's not his standard. So Pritchard's otherworldly start, along with Tatum, who's just taken a ton of threes and been super efficient on them, has made up for other guys who are on the lower end of that spectrum, including Porzingis, who hasn't found his three yet since coming back.
Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. Make your holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports teams. And again, you can win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you pay $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks is the best way to win real money this basketball season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on Prize Picks. And if you want in, here's what you got to do. Simply download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's downloading the app. Use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And we are back with Bobby Manning. And Bobby, this is the time of season when everyone is thankful for something. And the Celtics certainly, when you get to hoist that Larry O'Brien trophy, you got a lot to be thankful for. One of those players certainly that the Celtics nation is thrilled about is Jayson Tatum. And we touched on him a little bit earlier. Tatum, when you start looking at his numbers this year, and particularly, scoring, he's always going to be among, the better players in the league when it comes to scoring. He's averaging just under 29 points a game, I believe. But he's also averaging a career high 9.3 rebounds, and his assist numbers are high. And I'll just get your take, Bobby. His rebounding and his playmaking have both been up. Which of those two areas of his game have you been the most impressed with, the rebounding or the playmaking?
It's the playmaking. We talked about it 2 years ago, Sherrod, I guess 3 seasons ago now, when Ime had that vision of him being the playmaker for this team alongside Jaylen. Could he do it? Was he capable? That postseason, he has 100 turnovers, which breaks the record for a postseason. So we had all these questions about whether he could be the primary ball handler for this team, and now he's thriving in it. The kinds of passes he's making, the way he draws multiple defenders consistently inside and out. He's in full control many nights, and the turnovers are almost non-existent at this point. So it's a career high for assists for him with 5.7. It comes off the postseason run where in some series he was up near 7, finished with 6.3. And that's who he can be now. It's probably who you should expect him to be. Now, will defenses adjust? I know John's big on that when we've had that conversation that they should play him straight up more. But I thought Chicago did that, and he torched them for one of his most explosive games ever there with his third triple-double. And 45 points or whatever it ended up being there. So that's not an easy answer either. And he seems to have an answer for everything. And, you hear the respect most from the opponent, Sherrod. Jamal Mosley last night saying he thinks he's overlooked sometimes. But trust me, teams aren't overlooking Tatum going into games here. So I have him firmly in the top 5 at this point. I think it's indisputable, especially with Embiid's decline here health-wise. Now, when he's right, it's probably a closer conversation there. But at this point, I think Tatum is closer to the top dogs here in this MVP race and this top 5 hierarchy than some of the competition below him / behind him there. So it's definitely something you got to be thankful for as Celtics fans, that he keeps continuing to take steps here because they're going to need it as role players become more inconsistent, as injuries strike, and this team grows more expensive into the future here. They're going to be more reliant on Tatum to carry them. And that's why, Sherrod, I don't know if it's going to happen this year. I'm not ruling him out this season yet, just because of how consistent and dynamic he's been. But I do think he's going to win at least one MVP during his career because he continues to grow. He affects every area of the game. He's the only player in this top 5, Sherrod, that I think is good at every area of the game, whether rebounding, passing, defending. I think his defense has been very impactful when you look at the on-off numbers this year. And, of course, the three-point shooting that Jokic has. And Jokic, I think, is the only guy who's firmly above him in this conversation. But Giannis doesn't have, Shea doesn't have. And it is that shooting inconsistency, I think, that's the last step for Tatum to reach that top echelon of the league. There's not going through as many lulls offensively, shooting the ball from 3 as he does right now. And I looked at it yesterday, Sherrod. He has 9 games below 30% from 3 this year.
Wow.
And the competitors in the MVP race don't have that many. I think Shea has like 5. Jokic has like 3 or 4. So those lulls are what kill him still right now. And obviously he had that 0 for 10 game against Washington at one point here. So I think it's as simple as just cutting out a few bad shots per night from him to reach his peak potential here. And that's what we're talking about with him about 10 or his age 27 year here is his prime beginning. And I think we're starting to see like the, groundwork of that starting to take shape here.
Yeah, and the one thing about Tatum that I think, it to me, if you're a Celtics fan, it's both a blessing and a burden, is that he's so, when you look at his play overall, plays at such a consistently high level, but not out of this world level. Whereas you look at a guy like Giannis, he'll have those out of this world stretches where he's just putting up ridiculous numbers. And, Jokic putting up, video game numbers all the time. Same thing with Shea. Tatum doesn't really do that. But yet when you look at his overall body of work, in many respects, it's more impactful than what those other guys do. Because when you talk about, what I like to call the 5 tools of talent, the ability to score, rebound, defend, pass, and make your teammates better, Tatum tends to outperform those guys when you look at all of those groups in their totality. But it's just that he doesn't necessarily score the way Shea does. He doesn't necessarily rebound the way Giannis and Jokic do. And he's got better teammates. So his making teammates better doesn't get the credit it deserves because his teammates are already really good. And so he winds up being this guy that's like, yeah, he's really good and you respect him, but you're looking at others because they maybe have a little bit more visible sizzle to their game than he does.
Yeah, for sure. And some of those other guys do have staggering on-off numbers, especially from an offensive standpoint. That's been the story with Jokic for a long time here. That's tough to ignore is how the Nuggets just collapse when he's off the floor. And that's not the case with the Celtics anymore because of Brown and his growth and Pritchard's emergence here. So the team around him is going to hurt him here. I think Joe talked about that a little bit the other night while emphasizing the fact that he could probably push Tatum a little more in these games where he has it going and allow him to take over and put up some of the massive statistical nights that other guys do. And he mentioned that a lot of times Tatum doesn't even want to stay in the game late in those situations and run up the numbers. And who knows if that's actually the case, but those are the kind of things that you have to do to be able to win this thing. And sometimes it can draw you criticism. Sometimes it can run in contrast to winning, but I think the Celtics have found a good balance here where Tatum can put up the big stats, run up the numbers, and the team can still win here and it not go outside of the flow of the game. So for me, it's shot selection. If he can be a little more efficient from three, find better shots throughout the flow of the game. If he doesn't have it, go inside. I still love that the other night against Chicago, how he used the inside game, post-ups, tough finishes in traffic to set himself up for threes later in the game. And that balance on the floor is something that he can do that oftentimes the amount of threes that he takes doesn't allow him to do. He doesn't get into the mid-range as much as he did earlier in his career. He doesn't have that floater to lean on. So it is going to be tough finishes in traffic, free throws, and hitting, frankly, tough threes here, Sherrod, for him to get his buckets. And I think that's another thing that makes his scoring, his efficiency more impressive is so much of it is difficult.
Absolutely. And you know, regardless of where you see Jayson Tatum, if you're a Celtics fan, if you're frankly a fan of the NBA, you love what you see out of Tatum overall, and you're certainly thankful for what he's been able to bring to the league. And I think I speak for Bobby when I say I'm thankful that I went to Syracuse University, particularly this time of year when we are in a bowl game.
Yeah.
This is what we do. This is what we do.
And now McCord might be coming back. I mean, the blessings keep coming.
It just keeps coming. It keeps coming. And for those of you who have your own college team that you root for, that you support, and they're going to a bowl game, you're looking at ways to get there. And one way you certainly need to give some thought to is our good friends at Game Time. It is that time of year when folks all over the world are looking for ways to get to sporting events like bowl games, as well as concerts. And Game Time is the place to make that happen. Certainly when I'm thinking about going to a football game, Game Time is the first and last place that I want to look to and go to. One of the really cool things I love about Game Time is that, you know, the app, they have these really cool all-in pricing options that shows you the total price that you're going to pay before you get to checkout. And for me, that's a super big deal because the last thing you want to do is have that gotcha feeling when you get to the checkout and realize that what you thought you were paying isn't quite what they're asking you to pay. In addition to that, they also have panoramic views of the seats that you choose before you get to pay. So you get a sense of what your sightline is going to look like before you actually buy the ticket. So all you have to do to get in on this is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's download the app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off. Terms apply. What time is it? Game time. And Bobby, we're going to continue with this is what we're thankful for portion of the program. And we're going to talk a little bit about our good friend, Jaylen Brown. Jaylen's having another strong season. Again, he kept the Celtics afloat in the Orlando loss when pretty much no one was able to score other than him for the most part. He's averaging career highs in a number of categories, such as minutes played and as well as assists per game. What part of his game are you most thankful for at this point in his season with the Celtics?
Yeah, I'd say his flexibility and commitment to winning. I think an underrated part of this season so far is how Tatum took over that first quarter role, playing the full frame, and Brown comes out of the game now in those situations. And they flipped that a few times here, but more often than not, Jaylen has to take an early seat, and that's unfamiliar for him. We've seen for probably 3 or 4 seasons before this, he plays the full first quarter. He sets the tone, gets himself in a rhythm early, and Tatum takes a seat midway through that quarter, and then comes back and her torches the second unit. So I like the fact that they flipped that because it feels like it's adding more consistency to Tatum's game. I mean, how many slow starts have we seen in the past from Tatum that we don't see as much this year? And that could have flipped and forced Jaylen to dig his way out of some slow starts. But when he comes back in the game after that first stint, he's getting himself going. He's keeping those second units afloat. And in this game against Orlando, well, I do think he played some one-on-one forced basketball at times in this game. I think the game called for it, and it's such a tough defense. There were so few good shots to come by that his ability to get shots off in the lane, especially late where they were trying to come back from down 9 or so there, kept them within just one shot, I think, of winning this game. And, if it does flip the other way and Horford's shot falls there, we're probably heaping even more praise on Jaylen right now for being able to step into that number 1 role with Tatum out and sustain. So it's still a less efficient season from Jaylen. I think last year the shooting from him, especially at mid-range and being a threat from 3, I think is what drove him to a more impressive season than what we're seeing right now. But he's counteracted that with some nice passing out of traffic. I think his playmaking has continued to improve this year, and the defense is still something I'll give him a ton of credit for, being able to take on some of the tougher matchups so far this season and limit them to low shooting efficiency in those one-on-one matchups. I love the Milwaukee performance still, where they held the Bucks to 1-12 down the stretch, and he's unloaded the whole time and making it tough on him, pressing. So those are things he can go to if he doesn't have the offense going as much. And he continues in a difficult spot, right? Tatum's going to have the ball a ton. He's going to be the star on this team. He's going to take a lot of the shots. But Jaylen still finds ways to be consistently involved and be great, which I think is a difficult thing to do when he does it pretty consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you talk about consistency, that is like the last word anyone would use in reference to the Celtics Christmas Day opponent, the Philadelphia 76ers. It has been, in every sense of the word, a hot mess in Philly this year. When you look at Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and the fact that their big 3 has been a big dud up to this point, hardly ever on a court due to injuries, inconsistency, and occasionally ejection. What's your take on this Christmas Day game that clearly isn't anything remotely close to what the schedule makers or, frankly, the 2 teams playing anticipated would be at this point?
I think it should be a game the Celtics should be able to win fairly smoothly, especially with some of the lack of cohesion that we've seen from the Sixers. The second unit doesn't impress me at all, and it extends into the first unit, their depth issues here. I know they started KJ Martin in that San Antonio game, and Yabusele has started at different points, and you see an Eric Gordon in the late stages of his career pretty often out there for this team. So their depth isn't super impressive, and it's a lot of new guys too. I mean, this roster overturned in such a massive way over the summer that they're still in the early stages of trying to figure out what everyone's role is and how it all fits together here. So they'll have the big 3 for Christmas, you would think, and that's something that should make this game at least competitive. But I think there's so many holes in that defense, and Embiid's still not 100%. And George, whether it's physical or a decline in his game, just doesn't seem like the same guy at the start of the season. And that's the one that kills them. Now, Maxey's been phenomenal. I love what he's doing, and he saved them in the Spurs game again after Embiid's ejection there. But elsewhere, it's a slower, defensively vulnerable, and not super versatile team and not a deep team either. And I know the Celtics have their depth questions right now, but at home, I love Pritchard's ability to be able to take advantage of that second unit. If Hauser can go, I think he'll be able to have a strong showing. When he's played, he's been fairly effective. So I think the Celtics are going to win this game. Maybe not running away. I think it'll be competitive for a decent amount. And Embiid, in the for a full game before the San Antonio one, was able to get 34 points off. So he's always a matchup issue. But the ability to throw Horford at him like you did against Giannis, play bigger, just beat them on the other end. And again, Philly's an impressive offense right now. Defensively, I think there's just so many ways you can attack them. So I have the Celtics probably by like 10 points or so in this one.
That sounds about right. The thing that worries me about Philly is that they, in some respects, fall into the same category as the Chicagos and the Orlandos of the world. Teams that the Celtics on paper should beat and should beat, with very little effort per se. But for whatever reason,
thing's scary.
Yeah, because Maxey is a guy that you can absolutely see going off for like 40, 45 points. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a dogfight against this team. And to me, the thing, not only does Maxey concern me, but Yabusele concerns me, because we've seen so many former Celtics come back and play their best games of the season, of their careers even, against the Celtics. And I would not surprise me if Yabusele goes out there and has like a 2010 game. Do I think he can do that consistently? Hell no. Can he do that against his former team on Christmas Day? Would anyone be shocked? I certainly wouldn't be shocked if he put up numbers like that. So they concern me simply because they are very much like a lot of wounded squads that the Celtics face, that I just don't think the Celtics really try to kind of really lay the hammer down on them the way they did last year. It seemed that every game the Celtics played, they were trying to beat you by 20. And then they realized they got up by 30 and said, well, let's just win by 40. They don't seem to have that same kind of killer instinct this year. It's like they understand that they don't have to necessarily go all out to beat teams. And so to some extent, it feels like they don't. But that opens the door for opportunities for you to be upset, which obviously we saw in Chicago. We saw that against Orlando. And I would hate to see that on Christmas Day. But I just think that Philadelphia is so dysfunctional that even if the Celtics get in their way of victory, the Celtics or the Sixers will find a way to pave the way for the Celtics to get a victory. They're just that out of whack at this point. So,
yeah, shout out to Yabu, 9-5-2 this season, 38 from 3, 50 from the field. He's taking advantage of that second opportunity to play in the NBA here and getting some regular minutes and been an important piece there. So he didn't look great in that preseason game against Boston, but now that he's found his rhythm and regular role there in Philly, he's looking good.
Yeah, and I think he's going to be in the league for a while. I mean, I'm not talking about like another 10 years, but certainly, he's going to go at least another contract or two before he's done playing, which is great because, guys taken in the draft where he was, that's like the perfect storm to find a way, get with a team and have a career that lasts like 8, 9, 10 years. And that, I think at the end of the day, that's where he's going to wind up. One thing I wanted to shift to, Bobby, is talking about this new NBA All-Star Game format, which has drawn lots of, we'll just call it feedback from fans, from media. What is your take on this new format? And just for those who aren't familiar with it, basically the league now is going to have a total of 4 teams, like mini teams, almost like a mini tournament. 3 teams will consist of 8 players each, and that will be the 24 All-Stars. And then there will be the winning team of the Rising Stars Challenge will be the 4th team. And so then there'll be one of the teams of 8 will play the Rising All-Stars, and the other 2 All-Star consisted of teams will play each other. And then they'll play, the winners of those 2 will play. It's a lot of moving pieces, to say the least. But what's your general thoughts on the new All-Star Game format?
It could work. I like the fact that it's fast moving, that we're not just going to be watching a full game that drags on. And
because it plays to 40, I believe. I believe that's, yeah.
So I like that. My favorite format was probably those quarters where you'd play to a certain score and then you'd add it all up at the end and play to a target score in the fourth quarter around 2020 there, I think it was. And I love the target score. I think there's more situations you could put that into, and the All-Star Game is the perfect one to have it at. So that was my favorite format there. And I think back then you were still drafting teams, right? So it wasn't East-West. So I think that was the best of both worlds. You had the intrigue of the draft. There were a couple fun moments with that. I think Jokic got left last until 1 year, and then Rudy another year there. So those are fun, especially the televised versions of those. And then you're mixing it up. You get the target score. I think that was great. And then last year, you just go back to the basic East-West. And that was my first All-Star game I've been to, Sherrod, and it was horrible between the hosting city, which, I don't want to diss Indianapolis here, but it wasn't the best city, especially weather-wise for the game and events and all that stuff. So that didn't help either. But the game was horrendous. And now you're trying this thing, and I guess it was Durant, right, who's like, oh, just make it East-West. Well, that didn't work a year ago. So you do have to keep trying things if you're the NBA. They probably did the Rising Stars thing a year too late because you would have had Wembanyama involved in that a year ago. And this is probably the most unspectacular rookie class we've seen in about 10, 15 years here. So I don't even know who's going to be on that Rising Stars team that's going to be able to compete with the All-Stars here. But maybe that adds the competitive dynamic to it. The All-Stars might not want to play this thing. Maybe the Rising Stars come in and push them and play hard and try to win it. And that's something that leads to some competitive basketball here. So I'm not down on it, but the whole All-Star games become so inconsistent and all over the place and uncompetitive, of course, too, here, that it's become to the point where Barack Obama was complaining about it. One of the sore spots on the league's image right now, just how unserious it is, how great it used to be. Compared to where it is now, is probably, among all the issues with the league that we talk about, one of the biggest drop-offs over the last 10 to 20 years here. And I don't think this format's going to save it either. San Francisco, better site. I'm going to it again, Sherrod, so maybe it'll be better this time around. But I'm not counting on it.
Well, I think the biggest problem, and to me, it's the elephant in the room that no one wants to fully address or speak to because it's not in their interest, and that is guys don't play hard. They don't. I mean, they don't even pretend to play hard. And when you have a league where you have players who are not even like the top 5, top 10 players, yet they're hauling in 9-figure guaranteed contracts, and they're not even like, in some instances, they're not even the best player on their team, let alone in the league. And then in an all-star showcase type event, they don't work hard. They don't play hard. It has a way of leaving a bad taste in the mouths of a lot of fans. And I think that's what the league is figuring out. How can we combat that image? The fact that we have incredibly talented players, but they play as though they're privileged to the point where they don't really need the fans. And that's, I think that's one of those things that the league hasn't quite figured out how to remedy. But the remedy, it's so simple that it's incredibly complicated to make happen. And that is simply guys need to play hard. And I think, to your point, Bobby, by injecting those first, second-year players into the All-Star experience, that might be that little something that needs to be happen for players to play a little bit harder. Because the All-Star game, for the most part, it's just unbearable to watch right now. No one plays hard until like the last 2 minutes, and it's like you don't expect them to go all out for the entire game, but damn, if you're only going to play like 8 minutes as an all-star, how about playing hard for like, I don't know, 6 of those 8? Is that really asking a lot for you to play hard for 6 minutes in an all-star game format? So the concern, and I think you kind of touched on it, and it certainly is out there, is that if you continue to allow your product to be seen as less than valuable in the eyes of consumers, they're going to find something else to take that place. And that's the concern I think the NBA has at this point.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the rookie class again here. Like, what are we talking about? Vase Missy there in New Orleans has been the most effective rookie probably this year. Jaylen Wells and Memphis. I mean, these aren't stars. You could maybe put Zach Edey on that team, have a little buzz. And the killer's that Jared McCain can't go.
That's the killer.
Going back to Philly,
yeah.
Right? That would have been a massive boost in this thing. But, Dalton Knecht, there's just not a lot of star power or even talent in this draft right now. This is looking like, at least early on, one of the least alluring drafts in a long time for the league here. Now, I don't know, could Derek Lively go? Amen Thompson? Like, there are some guys from last year's class. I love Trace Jackson Davis. So there's some guys from last year that could probably give this team a boost. Jaime Jaquez. But is it going to be able to push and compete and threaten the All-Stars, Brandon Miller? So, last year's class, depending on how many guys actually want to be involved here, could lead to some competitiveness. But in terms of the timing here, again, you had Wembanyama last year and all that hype, and he was in that Rising Stars game along with some other great players. Mm-hmm. That would have been the time to do this thing. Now, I mean, it's probably hard for the average fan to name a rookie.
Yeah. And again, the only reason, the McClain kid was a big deal was because of all the injuries and inconsistency with the Sixers that afforded him an opportunity to get out there and play well. And to his credit, he made the most of that before obviously suffering, an injury. Last one I'm happy to come out and leave on this note, the MVP race. And I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but where does the MVP race stand with you as far as who's the front runner, who's your top three candidates at this point?
Yeah, Giannis, I think, rightfully closed in on Jokic a little bit in the straw poll the ESPN did there. I think Tim Bontemps noted a third of the voters changed their mind after the Cup, which is funny. But Giannis has played that much better over the last 15 games or so here. And the defensive impact, the way he's had to carry that Bucks team through Middleton's injury, and overall his scoring that leads the league, I think it's going to be a legitimate threat to Jokic, especially if the Nuggets continue to decline here. I mean, I watched that Pelicans-Nuggets game the other night, and it was very close, just a shot away at the end of regulation from the Pelicans being the latest bad team to upset Denver here. We've seen them lose to Washington and some other teams that they shouldn't, and they're struggling to stay afloat in the standings there in Denver. So that's going to help Jokic until it doesn't. The fact that he needs to carry them night in and night out and play all these minutes and put up these monstrous stats, it's great for now. But if the Nuggets drop to 6, even in that play-in range in the standings there, it'll be a harder argument for him to win this thing because of the winning argument that other guys have here, Tatum included, who I think, again, if he can maintain the statistical output that we saw against Chicago, the higher level games, the games that catch national attention, turn heads, I don't think he's that far off in this conversation right now to say that it's insurmountable. Now, he has to get over Shea, too, who's another guy carrying his team night in and night out, scoring 30 points pretty much every game, along with defensive impact. And I do think Shea's defensive numbers are better than Tatum's, too, here. So I think that's a fair hierarchy for now. I would probably go Jokic 1, Giannis 2, Shea 3, and then Tatum at the 4 spot right now. And that's the race. I don't think Luka is reaching a point where he's not playing enough games to be on pace to reach the 65 right now. I think he's missed 8 already so far this season at least. And I think with the defensive issues for him and efficiency being a little bit down and the numbers being a little down too this year, we saw it in the voting with ESPN there that voters do look at him as behind Tatum and some of these other guys. But again, he's not that far behind where if he does play enough games to close out this year, start to be in that 39-9 or even 33-9 area that he was a year ago, you got to give him some serious consideration too here. So it's a fun race. I love how much we can debate this year in and year out now and how many names are involved. And if you're a Celtics fan, you got to be very excited that Tatum's back and firmly in the race this much. Because I think in recent years, Sherrod, he was in that top 5, but he was far behind the other 4 guys. This year, I think he's right in the thick of the race, and we're almost 30 games in here.
Yeah. And I think Jokic, he's going to be, to me, he's the leader of the pack until they fall out of the top 6. Because I just can't envision a scenario where your league MVP has the 7th best record or the 8th best record.
I don't think it's been done.
Yeah, I don't think it's been done either. I mean, and to me, it makes that shift from being someone who's really carrying their team to be competitive to someone who's putting up very hollow stats on a bad team. And I think right now, he's on the positive side of that coin as far as he's helping his team be in playoff contention. But the minute they fall into that play-in format stage, that's when those numbers are no longer about winning. It's about basically hollow stats of a really good player on a really crappy team. And that, to me, is going to open the door for guys like Giannis. So I think right now, Giannis is probably my MVP. Just because of the way that he has been able to elevate his play, the way that he's been able to elevate the play of those around him. And they're winning games, and he's giving you MVP-esque numbers, and they're winning games. So to me, he's my one. Jokic is my number two. My number three, I want it to be Tatum, but I got to go with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just because he's one of the few players that I see in this league who puts up very big numbers, and he relies on his athleticism in a league that is littered with super above average athletes. And he just looks more athletic than all of them. And he's putting up numbers, and his team is winning. And there's no doubt about who the number one option is for his team. And he's doing this at an age where, frankly, most guys are just kind of coming into their own and trying to figure out where they fit into the league. Not only has he done that, he's the leader of a team of young guys, and they play consistently. They play above, their age in terms of wisdom and understanding of how to play at, this level. So he's my number three, and Tatum is a strong four rising. I can absolutely see him finishing the top two or three when all's said and done. Particularly if he is able to, let's say, have really monster games against Milwaukee in the playoffs. And if he's able to, or actually it wouldn't even matter at that point, if he's able to statistically hold his own with Giannis going forward and be able to just kind of really up his numbers a little bit, and hopefully Jokic will just continue, for Tatum's sake, will continue to have struggles as a team, which will make him less and less attractive an option. And then it becomes a three-person race between him, Giannis, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And another guy that we haven't really talked much about, and he's doesn't have quite the same sizzle, even though his team has the best record, is Donovan Mitchell. I think Donovan Mitchell is he's almost like that fifth MVP candidate, kind of the way Isaiah Thomas was when he had that phenomenal year. You knew that there's three or four guys that are going to be in the top four, and then there's Isaiah. I think Donovan Mitchell might be that fifth guy this year.
I mean, if they can finish in the standings above Boston, no one would have predicted that going into this year. And they now have a 3.5 game cushion over the Celtics, which isn't nothing here, especially at the rate that they're winning. And they were able to beat Boston in a game this season too so far. So I think Mitchell is on the periphery of this conversation. I think he finished 7th in the straw poll. I want to say Towns lurking there too with New York, who's put up some great numbers to begin this season as well. So I think Mitchell's name does go a little underrated here. And I don't know if he's going to be able to string together enough games and the stats and consistency to be able to get it done on par with these other guys here. But he should be mentioned in the conversation right now just because of what the team's been able to do off his success, ball handling, scoring, all that. And Garland's been great there too. I think that's probably going to knock him a little bit. But it's so impressive what they're doing right now. And I don't think it's being discussed enough to the point where they probably seriously could wrap up that 1 seed in the East this year. And that would hurt Tatum, I think. The biggest argument that Tatum's going to have in the end, just like last year, is we're the best team. I'm the best player on that team. And that should get more credit than stats, especially hollow stats, like you mentioned earlier, whoever ends up bringing those to the table here. But, Thunder basically have the same record as the Celtics. That's a feather in Shai's cap. And if the Cavs finish better than the Celtics, I think it's going to be impossible for Tatum to win this thing because he's not going to have the stats of a Jokic, Giannis, and all these other guys, Shai. So he's going to have to, just like last year, build a strong case that this is the best team in the league and I'm the reason for it. And right now, he doesn't quite have that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, before we head out here, just want to give one more shout out to our good friends at Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of CLNS Media Network, and also our good friends at Game Time, which takes the guesswork out of buying last-minute tickets to your favorite sporting events and concerts. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, that's going to do it for me and Bobby Manning today. Bobby, appreciate you coming on the podcast. As always, nothing but love. Syracuse love beyond that. Good to see you as always, my friend.
Great, yeah. Looking forward to Christmas, this game, and have a Merry Christmas, Sherrod.
Absolutely. Same to you, Bobby. And I'll talk to you soon. And again, thanks for tuning in to the Big 3 NBA podcast. Take care.